Hello, everybody. This is Nick Matar, going to bring in our first look here at a presentation that I have been giving a couple of times to different audiences, but started getting a couple of requests for a general overview of how to generate hundreds of new content ideas. So going to go through a quick version of this, with these walkthroughs and these videos. I try to keep them under 10 minutes. So if they do go over 10 minutes, that's not my intention, but I do have a lot of examples that I'll be showing here. So just before we start, my name is Nick Matar. I am the author of a first real big content marketing textbook published by Stukent out of the Mountain West there in Idaho. And I also teach digital marketing topics, various courses, an intro course, social media, SEO, and user experience as well, plus analytics and a capstone across a couple different schools in higher education. So trying to share some of my knowledge here on this channel. This is really one of the first videos that I'm showing. And so, I'm also using a podcast mic for the first time. So let's see if this will actually work. The audio is good. Gotten some feedback that I've been soliciting from some friends here over time, some colleagues in the area. So let's give it a shot. Let's see how this goes. How to generate hundreds of new content ideas and quickly too. And really, we got to start with the question of what is quality content. And that starts with the question, or not just the question, but the statement that you really need to write for your audience first and foremost. A lot of times people get caught up in the idea that they're writing for themselves or that they're writing based on a topic. And in reality, you're writing for others. And this, I start with the whole idea of writing content, but there's a lot of other different types of content that are out there. You have video, you have audio, you have social media, you have all sorts of content ideas and content types, and we'll go over a lot of those here. But when you're trying to come up with new content ideas, you want to first and foremost start with your target audience. You want to make sure that you understand their habits, interests, and motivations, because in reality, if you write for yourself, sure, there might be an intersection between what you like and what people like you like, but you really need to have a focus and a goal in terms of who you are writing for. And it doesn't matter how niche it is. To be perfectly honest, you can be as niche as you want, and we're seeing that more and more often in the social media world with the rise of TikTok specifically, TikTok and Instagram as well. I mean, you have things that are so niche that get so many followers and are so successful that you have memes just from Seinfeld. I mean, that's a TV show that hasn't been on for almost 25 years, I think it is. Its last episode was in the late 90s. I mean, I was a child when Seinfeld wrapped up, and I've been a huge Seinfeld fan my whole life. And I think it's gaining some more notoriety now that it's back on Netflix. But you have an Instagram account that is just called Costanzagrams, named after George Costanza, with 600,000 followers. And they just post regularly on Instagram and get tons of engagement. Another example that I didn't post here that I just saw recently and heard about actually in class when I was teaching the other night is that there's some TikTok channels that are so niche that you hear them up front and you think that's way too specific, but then you see it as a viewer and you think this is my type of thing. This is my thing. One example is the idea that there's an account that just reviews Caesar salads from different places. I follow a guy who just tests out different combinations of food, and they all include cottage cheese. That's niche. That is the definition of niche, to be perfectly frank. And so it's really interesting to see just how niche you can get. And the idea here is that the more niche you get, the more you can add variety to it. Because if you're niche and you know what you're talking about and you know the type of content, that then allows you to focus on that and the diversity of content that you can get from it. And when I say that, I mean these different types of examples here, like visuals. In the upper corner, we have a nice targeted chart from Charter. I highly recommend subscribing to their email list if you want to see some really niche charts, right? That's just oat milk versus other alternative milks, like very, very specific. You have your business gifts, memes and gifts. They have a place in marketing and in business marketing too, brand business marketing. When you look at how businesses can adequately use memes and gifs, if you were to look at some best practices, which that's not for here or there today, that's for another time, but they are adequately using popular memes and gifs for a purpose that is for that serves their niche audience. The most successful niches when it comes to actual like fun content and how, ones that are successful, you look back at the George Costanza example and they're just using clips from Seinfeld, but they are applying to very specific situations. And people like myself who watch Seinfeld and currently watch the reruns, we look at those as like, oh man, like I can relate to that. Oh yeah, Kramer's doing that funny thing again. But that also extends over to other things. There's infographics like this Facebook versus Google one here. Pretty niche, not as niche as the other ones. You can go the way of more fun data visualization, which is that the extrovert versus introvert weekend chart. And then you have the upper right, which is really niche, and that is the idea of more handwritten drawings and the idea that it really fits a brand identity and brand awareness. And this is from I think it's Lehigh University that does a magazine, and all of their images are like neatly drawn, essentially photos that turn into nice images. The other thing, we're clearly going to go over 10 minutes here, by the way, is that nobody really cares about your opinion unless it's a scorching hot take. And the idea here is that sharing your opinions, honestly, is pretty overrated unless it's really polarizing. LinkedIn released a report a little while ago, I believe it was in the middle of 2021, and they said, people have seen enough of thought leadership. They don't care about op-eds. They don't care about people that are just reaffirming what they already know. Really, they're just looking for scorching hot takes. And when you think about scorching hot takes, we first often look at sports. The people at the talking heads in sports, you have like Skip Bayless, Stephen A. Smith, people like that. They are household names because they have scorching hot takes. Nobody cares if they're right or wrong. Well, some people do. People on Twitter do. People that are fans of the players like LeBron, for example, those people care. But most of the public does not care. They just know who they are. And that's really what they're trying to get out of this is they want brand notoriety. They want people to listen, to watch, to click through. They want to be able to monetize their presence. And when it comes to content, sharing your opinions is going to need to be something that really has people on both sides of the spectrum. And we could go into a large, kind of a large digression about this, and we will another time. But really the process goes like this. Somebody shares a scorching hot take, people roast them or they support them. Social media platforms love the engagement because they see all the posts and they see the comments and they see the shares and the reactions. Ratings skyrocket, follower counts increase, all those KPIs that advertisers look for, they will go up with the hot takes. So what do you do? I would recommend solving a problem or answering a question. And for me, I am essentially answering a question just by doing this, in that I'm presenting these ideas. I think that I'm not presenting any hot takes, to be perfectly honest, and what I'm sharing kind of goes in the face of what I just said in terms of what's going to work and what's not going to work, but I consider this more academic. Anyways, but you want to be sure that you're providing value. And when you post something online, you need to make sure that it's inspiring, educating, or motivating, first and foremost. Those are really the three terms. There's some other verbs that they can do, but they are supposed to provide value to somebody. Somebody needs to consume your content and think, oh yes, I am That was good. That was good. So where do you find these sources of information? Really, the first place I look is not Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, other social networks. I look at non-traditional social media. I look at places like Reddit, Quora, Nextdoor, the really niche social networks, and those that have larger conversations about very niche topics. Another point that came up in class the other day is that I have a classmate that follows a topic on Reddit that's all about not just golf, but people that are sharing videos and questions about improving their game, even specific parts of their game, like that backswing, or hey, you got to work on that short game. How do I eliminate certain problems that I'm having with my game? Pretty niche when you think about it. When you think about the fact that I subscribe to Reddit subreddits that are pretty larger topics: search engine optimization, content marketing, digital marketing in general. Those have hundreds of thousands of followers. But you can also look into those larger pages to see what are the topics that are actually attracting the most conversation, and what does that conversation look like. If you take a look at Reddit or of Quora, specifically here in this example, I just went in and looked at how to start a business, and all sorts of business topics came up. I just took a poll at the recent looks. And Quora is a site that used to be, I believe it used to be Yahoo Answers. And it starts with somebody asking a question and then other people responding. And I get a daily digest from Quora, and I see some really weird stuff that gets asked, and some real even weirder answers. And Quora is definitely still relevant. People will say that Quora was something from like 2012, 2010, even before that. But I'm seeing posts with hundreds of answers to them, and not only answers, but then replies to the answers. Quora originally started as just a place where you could ask a question, then there'd be one answer. Now it is a full-blown social network that isn't worldwide, but it's known enough and it's used by enough people that you're getting a lot of diverse responses. So the questions here, this was all, again, these are recent questions. So it's not like, oh, this has two answers. It's not a big deal. These were all things that were asked pretty recently. So you have something like, okay, I have several ideas to do business. How can I decide which one is best to start working on? That had 16 different responses. That's 16 different people that wanted to share their thoughts. Or if you have something, if you were to start over, would you become a CEO? No answers yet. Maybe you can answer that one. This is really a portal to help you find some questions where you might know the answer and you can share your thoughts here. When I originally built this presentation about 8 months ago, I actually came up with it because I first saw a question on Quora, then I saw another one on Reddit. And I thought to myself, okay, this is it. How do I generate lots of content ideas without the same old HubSpot, Hootsuite answers, which is usually to do keyword analysis, do some SEO, look on social media sentiment, stuff like that. I'm trying to provide very straightforward steps to do, which should differentiate a little bit. I saw the question on Quora and there were a couple of answers, and none of them had what I expected. And so what I'm trying to do here actually is based off of a situation similar to this. Another thing you may want to look at is the comment section. I mean, you're going to end up laughing or getting offended, or you might go down a comment hole, especially on YouTube. But they can be useful. And I did a quick YouTube search for digital marketing courses, and there are a bazillion videos. I would never try to optimize on YouTube for digital marketing courses because there's just too many people that have more followers, more views, and I guess, to be perfectly frank, more experiences that are smarter than me. But if you look here, there are some good answers here. Not answers, but some good insights. First off, there was one, like the bottom one. I couldn't grab the whole thing, but somebody was looking for skills to learn during a pandemic. Somebody in the middle says, I'm an author writing to take charge of marketing my books. What course plan would you suggest? That's a good idea. And then that top one, basically owning websites that generate leads for small businesses. When I started in real estate, working full time, et cetera, et cetera. So you have people sharing their experiences. Not saying that this is going to give you the answer that you need to start creating these content ideas, but it can help provide some inspiration. Because honestly, this is the same type of content that needs to inspire, educate, and motivate. And don't forget the Google autocomplete. Pretty much any time that you Google, hey, how do I come up with new content ideas? The resources are going to say, hey, use the Google autocomplete. And that actually is pretty helpful. When I look at real estate marketing, building off of the first comment from that YouTube example just before, you see all sorts of ideas here. And I don't know whether or not these are actually the most searched Google terms. I know that they are certainly popular. Honestly, you could take a look at any of these and develop something to be niche for you. I've worked with realtors in the past in marketing. I would not recommend that in terms of trying to monetize it, but I can tell you that there's a lot of people searching for this type of stuff. You can always do your good old keyword research using SEMrush, using Google Keyword Planner. But again, this here is really just to provide you with some inspiration. The last thing here, and I actually learned this from a webinar that I attended about 2 years ago, is looking at your own emails. I can't remember who it was, but it was a really, really good idea that this guy presented. And I actually quoted this in my textbook that he said that you could look back at your own emails, and if you're a digital marketer specifically, or whatever industry you're in, chances are that some of your emails are going to be including some tidbits of knowledge that you could share elsewhere and not just to the people on the other end. I found that really insightful, and I went back and looked after I watched the webinar. And yeah, it took me a while, but I did find some inspiration on topics that I forgot that I knew about, topics that I didn't even remember talking about and emailing back and forth. And then sometimes I'd receive emails from others that had some really good insight. If you don't really use email in this way, it might not be as helpful, but there's a lot of potential there. Finally, what is the step from inspiration to execution? Because there is this idea that I've just been kind of sharing some ways to find inspiration, but then how do you actually put it into practice? And the first thing I say is don't just write a blog. Sure, you can write a blog post, but don't stop there. Writing a blog alone, to me, is only about 25% of what you can do with the potential. Actually, maybe even less. Blogs are great because you get all of your ideas out there. It's all written. Blogs are commonly consumed. They do well on SEO. There's all sorts of benefits to blogs. I love blogging myself. I've been doing it since I was in high school, but that should not be the only thing that you do. Once you create content, it's meant to be repurposed. You want to do more than just write a blog post and even promote it. You want to recreate it in other ways, but also think about how the audience consumes this new content differently, because different content forms will get different levels of engagement. People are going to consume it separately. For example, if you have a blog post and you have a call to action to download, an ebook or to join your email list, that's not going to be your CTA if you turn around and turn it into a blog post or even a video post like this. The call to action is going to have to be a little bit different. You can't just have a strict link and expect people to click through. You need to have more than that. And I'm not going to go through all the ideas here, but you do need to think about what is the goal of the content. Think about how you're going to tilt it for the specific audience. Are you going to create presentations like this? Are you going to create video? Are you going to create audio? Are you going to create infographics? Are you going to make an event out of it? What are you going to do with it? But then ultimately, what are your goals too? Think about that, because there's so many different ideas. I created this table. I opened up an Excel spreadsheet, and I probably wrote this in about 5 minutes. So this isn't exhaustive, but it's the first 30 things that I thought of, and I thought that it was fairly useful. I mean, not all of these ideas are going to apply to every type of content that you're creating, but I imagine at least half of these could work for you. You're going to have to think about some tangential ideas here. The idea here when you think about content is that you don't just want to create something and then recreate it and repurpose it to be essentially the same and have the same goals. You want them to be offshoots of the original piece of content. So I actually have not written a blog post about how to come up with hundreds of content ideas, and this was actually my first thing, but usually my typical workflow is that I'll write a blog post. I will then record it into an audio form. Then I will turn around and either do a video like this or turn it into a presentation. And then from there, I'll look at a list of different content ideas like this and see what applies to what I'm creating. Sometimes I'll start a Reddit thread. I haven't had a lot of luck there. I have in other areas for other topics, but usually more academic topics, at least in my experience, have not worked as well on Reddit. Usually you're looking for consumer topics that people are actively seeking out. And on Reddit, marketing is great and it does get a lot of views, but it just does, for whatever reason, I haven't seen it get the amount of response that some other topics do. If you're working on a home improvement project, for example, and you want to show your progress, that's going to do a lot better on a site like Reddit than say, hey, I have a blog post on all these content ideas. What do you think? Now, at the same time, if it's me and I'm talking about, hey, creating my coming up with all these content ideas, I would probably go next for the infographic path. I might record an interview with somebody else who's done this as well. I might create a fun quiz like on BuzzFeed, where you say, hey, what kind of content should you create next? And then set up these different questions about what you've created so far. Honestly, I just came up with 10 things just sitting here, and I have not premeditated this. Meditated? Yeah, this is not premeditated. I literally just came up with this. So it's something where you can come up with a lot of ideas, but you just need to have an idea and you need to have a niche. A couple examples really quick before we wrap up. This is an explainer video. I highly recommend, if you've never heard of any, to give it a search on YouTube. It's just the using of iconography in video and animation to explain what is typically considered to be a complex point. This video specifically is a very complex business, and I had no idea what it was about until I watched the explainer video. And so I just paused it here because look at it, it requires expertise and time and deep pockets. I don't even remember what this was. It was some sort of wealth management company based out of Europe, I believe. But the explainer video explained it to me very well, and I would not have been able to understand it reading a paragraph of text. On the other hand, you can use mini social infographics like you have here. Most marketers think of infographics as tall, vertical, very Pinteresty visuals. And usually these are things that only work on websites and on typical blogs, websites, or Pinterest. Maybe even Twitter now that they don't crop images. But you can also do it like this, where it's more horizontal in nature and can be applied to the other social networks. I found this really interesting. I found it on Twitter, I believe. It looked good both there and on Facebook and on LinkedIn. Like, it worked really well. It was optimized for some of those. I think this one has a little too much text, but you do need to provide some context when you're sharing content. Another thing, this is actually the webinar where I learned about that email idea. It's a great idea. I mean, he's actually doing two things here. One is a screen share, sharing screenshots, I should say, screenshots, and taking those and posting those on as visuals, for example. Great example of something that works. Obviously, your screenshot needs to be something enticing and inspiring and telling a story. But of course, this is a screenshot within a webinar. And he's sharing a webinar about how to come up with new content ideas. Absolutely inspirational. This was the webinar that inspired me. I'm going to have to find it, and I will be sure to post it in the notes. Then you do have your typical infographic. And this is a pretty gaudy one that I found about YouTube and how YouTube is utilized. There's some pretty insane numbers here. I'm not going to go through them because also this is pretty old. This, I believe this is from 2019. So if you want to use something, if you want to do a crazy infographic, this is for you. You'll also notice how this infographic breaks up everything into blocks, and it actually makes it so that it's very modular, and you can take them as individual graphics and post them online. And like on social media. Something like this is not going to work well on social media because the font becomes so small. People don't usually take advantage of zooming in. They're too lazy to do that, especially on their phones, because they don't want to have to pinch to move in, or the opposite of pinching, whatever that is. But if you can take individual blocks of this, say you take this one in the top right, YouTube processes more than 3 billion searches a month. That's a massive number. That is something that is going to capture the attention. You could post that image, even though it's just words and a magnifying glass graphic, post it onto Twitter along with some context. There's the word YouTube isn't in the graphic, for example. And suddenly you can build a huge Twitter thread out of all of these pieces. Now you have an infographic that can exist on a website with a blog post, as well as a corresponding Twitter thread that could have, it looks like, at least 15 different pieces to it. There's also the promotion of a podcast using video or visuals. The Stukent team does a really good job of promoting their podcast in this way here. They just posted a 33-second clip, arguably like the best, most insightful clip from the podcast. They've got the branding of the podcast there. They've got the little waveforms from audio to show that it is audio, in fact. And then it's posted to social media. Really interesting stuff. I've seen other examples of this that also work really well. Another thing for sharing podcasts I've noticed are sharing like the key topics. Adrian Wojnarowski from ESPN, who is a big NBA guy, he used to do this. He doesn't do it as much anymore, but he would have an hour-long podcast, and then you'd see with the tweet that promotes it, an image that corresponds with it. And it's literally just a Word doc with timestamps and then the topic. And it captures your attention because while you can only promote one thing officially in the title and in the description, I mean, you can put other things in the description. But if you put everything in the visual piece in that image, like I would look at something and see if I see something about the Pistons or about a player that I like that's further down in like 15 or 16 minutes, I'm not going to get that out of a video or out of a quick clip or even something like what Stukent has done here. But I am going to see that in those extended show notes. And I am going to look at the show notes. I'm not going to look, you can't see the description of the podcast and see all that extra detail unless you go to it. And honestly, by moving that to the forefront of the viewer on Twitter, being able to see that, suddenly now I'm interested in going to Spotify and listening to it, whereas I might not otherwise if it's only going to address teams and players that I don't already follow. Another example, this is the graphic that I shared earlier, which was with the oat milk and that rocket GIF. And this is more of the fun data visualization. This is supposed to be a little bit more lighthearted. It's supposed to be, it's not a joke because it's a very serious thing, but at the same time, it is a little bit lighthearted. It does require some design, but it takes a serious topic and it makes it a little bit more fun. Something like this is designed for a very specific target audience. If this was put into, say, a traditional Microsoft Excel chart and then put onto social media or like Pinterest, for example, would not get nearly the engagement that you would see here because this looks hand-drawn. It looks more fun and it makes you want to see it. It is less businessy, more consumer focused, and something like this is going to work better if you're trying to avoid that overly businessy topic. Finally, we have the old social media graphic. This is something that Social Media Examiner does for all of their articles, is they'll create a quick little graphic that they put at the top of all their articles, and then they also use that because it then will apply to their link preview when they're sharing the link on social media. It's a really nice little addendum here. You can create something like this on Canva in 5 minutes using a template. It takes the headline just takes a quick couple of graphics, infographic or icons together, and then you just post it. And now suddenly you have something that says something more than just a traditional stock image, which you might have in your blog post. So now, I mean, we're at 30 minutes and I said I was going to keep it at 20 minutes. So, you know, that's fun, but I'm going to quickly go through these, some of these really good tools here. Quick tips and tricks. First, you have SEMrush, Ahrefs, Moz, other SEO tools are really, really good. Ahrefs will actually send you a report of with your blog and your website, including all of your backlinks and any issues that you have. I think SEMrush will do the same, but Ahrefs will do it for free. These SEO tools can also help you answer popular questions. SEMrush is really good with this. They have a whole new content marketing platform that will give you ideas based on your topics, based on your keywords, and based on competitor websites. But again, focus on your niche. When you're repurposing content, you want to focus on the audience for not just your audience, but also the audience for the platform where you're going to be posting. If you're on LinkedIn, you want to keep it somewhat businessy. You don't want to go too B2C here. I mean, it is B2C because there are consumers there, but you want to talk more of the business slant on LinkedIn. Another example is Twitter. Lots of research has shown that trending topics and news are going to be best on Twitter. Even Twitter has gone as far as to say that, because if you think about what Twitter itself will go out and share all sorts of tips and tricks for using Twitter for business. And suddenly you see that they're sharing all sorts of lists and like upcoming events and all this fun stuff. And that's because Twitter knows that if you share stuff on Twitter that is event-based, it's going to do a lot better. The more specific your content, the more it's going to resonate with your niche. Finally, take advantage of free. Just a couple of examples. There's lots of free sites that will help set your content apart. There's more than Canva and there's more than Grammarly. Something like TweetGen will let you fake your own tweets, create your own tweets, which, be careful with that. Storyboardthat.com, you can create a comic book strip for yourself. Memes, you can use where you find the trending memes, and fake iMessage. It's fake iMess, but it's actually about fake iMessage where you can build your own screenshot. So like I created this in about 20 minutes on Storyboard that. This is my new meme creator as I take Vince McMahon and turn it into something of a kind of a goofy situation. And these take minutes to do. And really, I mean, that's the idea, is you want to come up with lots of new content ideas without having to spend too much time on it. Because really the big takeaway here is that you want to use these existing conversations to inspire your ideas, but then you also want to be able to repurpose and update content without spending too much time yourself. And that's kind of the bottom line here. Take note of the content that's going to resonate with your audience, because you can transform your content in I showed you 30 ways and I walked through 10 and, as we're sitting here, but there's really hundreds of them that can stem off from that as well. Because when it all comes down to it, you want to create content that your audience will enjoy. And I've always said that digital marketing is all trial and error anyways. The ability to see real-time analytics gives digital marketing and digital marketers an avenue to check and see if their work is actually paying off for them instantly. This is unlike anything that we've really seen in marketing, because in the old days, advertising would require, let's put it up in front of a billboard and show it in front of X number of cars, right? But now we are at an inflection point where the most successful digital marketers will tell you the same thing, from people like Neil Patel and Brian Dean, all the way down to people like me. Like, they've all had failures. Like, nobody just stepped out one day, knew everything and had success immediately. Everybody kept trying and seeing what worked and what didn't work. The key is that you need to create something that your audience is going to enjoy. How do you know that they enjoyed it? Look at the numbers, look at the posts, look at everything all together, come up with a way to measure success for you, but then also for your audience. What's going to provide value? What will inspire? What will educate? What will motivate? Think about all of those together, and you should have something that will work. So that covers the my discussion here today, and I hope the few people that watch this will actually enjoy it. If anybody actually watched the whole thing, please let me know. Drop a line in the comments, and let me know what you would like to hear next. If anything, if you think I should just stop here and cut my losses on time, I'm happy to do that too. So thank you.